July 1943. The dry hills of Sicily are covered in smoke and dust. The smell of fuel mixed with sea salt and burnt earth. The distant sound of artillery is constant, like a storm that never ends. The American army advances through destroyed villages, and behind the front lines, a small detachment tries to build something that resembles a hospital. Canvas tents stand crookedly under the sun, held up by makeshift stakes and ropes salvaged from trucks. Boxes marked with red crosses pile up in disorganized stacks. There is little ice, little light, almost no medicine. The floor is dirt. The air is thick, hot, and stuffy. Even so, men wearing dust and sweat-stained lab coats move as if they were in a Boston operating room. In the midst of it all is Captain Samuel Avery, 32, Chief Surgeon of the U.S. Army's Temporary Medical Unit. The sun glints off the silver badge on his chest as he adjusts the scarf around his neck. He has the look of someone who sleeps too little and thinks too much. He was raised among books and surgical instruments, the son of a university hospital doctor, Harvard, residency in Boston, a promising future interrupted by enlistment. Avery never imagined he would end up operating under canvas tents in heat that makes clocks stop working. "Captain," says Lieutenant David Heller, approaching with a notepad, "the supplies from the convoy haven't arrived." Again, Avery doesn't respond immediately. He runs his fingers over his dust-covered chin and looks at the horizon, where the sky shimmers like heated metal. "Do we have enough to keep the patients alive until tomorrow?" "Maybe, but we're out of ice. The instruments have been boiling for half an hour. The forceps are turning black." "Then use soap, Heller." "I already have. Use it again." The tone is dry, but not harsh. Avery speaks as if giving orders to himself. Every decision is a balance between science and desperation. He can't afford to complain. There are wounded men who depend on him. Inside the main tent, the heat is suffocating. The generator fails every hour, and the hanging lamps flicker like sick fireflies. The team improvises, using vehicle flashlights and headlight reflectors to illuminate the tables. The humidity turns everything into slippery metal. Avery adjusts the sheet covering a patient and observes the man's pale skin. There is no visible blood, but there is fever. A lot of fever. The surgeon has noticed something wrong in recent weeks. Simple injuries, cuts, scrapes, even bites, become serious infections in a matter of days. The lack of penicillin is critical. What little arrives is reserved for officers or extreme emergencies. Avery writes in his diary, "War medicine fails not only because of a lack of medicine, it fails because of a lack of imagination." At night, the camp is filled with the sounds of footsteps, tired voices, and the clinking of metal pots. Heller tries to organize the supplies while two nurses wash instruments in basins of boiling water. Steam rises in columns, illuminated by the dim light of the lamps. Avery watches silently. He sees the steam, sees the bubbling water, and something in his mind awakens. "Lieutenant," he says, pointing to the bucket, "look at that." The steam rises, condenses, and falls again. "It's the cleanest cycle there is." Heller frowns. "With all due respect, sir, it's just boiling water. It's the beginning of an idea." That night, while the rest of the camp sleeps, Avery scribbles diagrams in his notebook. Lines, tubes, arrows. He imagines a system that uses steam to purify instruments. No autoclaves, no constant electricity, just pressure, heat, and patience. The next morning he begins building what he calls the war kettle. He takes pieces of rubber from a damaged tank, uses aluminum pots from the rations, pieces of copper tubing, and rusty nails. Heller watches the scene and shakes his head. "This won't work, Captain." Avery smiles, exhausted. Everything in medicine started with someone saying that. When the first test takes place, the team laughs. Steam gushes out from all sides, the noise is deafening, and half of the pans slip off the structure. But something works. After 2 hours, the tools come out shining. Avery smells the clean metal, the same smell as the hospitals he left behind. For the first time in weeks, he smiles genuinely. In the days that follow, he repeats the process. Surgeries become safer. The infection rate plummets. Nurses begin to believe that there is something almost miraculous about that equipment. Before long, other detachments send messengers to observe the method. Some copy it, others simply report the improvised sterilization procedure to their command. When a senior officer finally shows up for inspection, the sun is already high in the sky, and the camp looks more organized than ever. The man, in an impeccable uniform and clipboard in hand, observes the steaming cylinder next to the main tent. "Captain Avery, what exactly is this?" The solution, sir. It looks like a stove. It's an autoclave made from truck parts and a lot of stubbornness. The officer stares at him for a long moment. This is against regulations. No medical equipment can be modified without authorization. Then punish me, sir. But first look at the results. Avery hands over the logbook. Weeks of notes, charts, and reports showing the dramatic decline in infections. The officer leafs through it silently, shakes his head, and finally writes something on his clipboard. I'll call this non-standard field sterilization procedure. Continue, Captain. Just don't blow it up. When the man leaves, Heller comments, laughing. He thinks we're mad scientists. We're trying to be, Avery replies. It's better than being gravediggers. But the success of the improvisation raises another concern. Avery realizes that even with clean instruments, many patients continue to suffer. There is no adequate anesthesia, not enough light, and each surgery is a race against heat and exhaustion. Military medicine follows strict protocols, and he begins to wonder how many lives are lost through excessive obedience. One August afternoon, a sudden storm descends on the camp. The tents shake, the wind tears off tarps, and the ground turns to mud. Avery and Heller struggle to protect the equipment. When the wind subsides, the hospital is in ruins, but the metal cylinder of the war kettle remains standing, steaming like a symbol of resistance. Avery looks at it and murmurs, "This is just the beginning." In the days that follow, he begins to develop a new method of suturing, adapted to the materials he has available. Parachute cords, staple needles, and the same principle. Use what the field offers. His notes grow, and the team begins to call him the flesh and blood engineer. The military command, intrigued, sends a message asking for explanations. Avery responds with a few words. Improvisation is what separates a doctor from a dreamer. In that small tent in the interior of Sicily, far from universities and research centers, a philosophy was born that would forever change field medicine. And Samuel Avery still had no idea that his improvised inventions would soon attract the attention of the high command. Not for breaking the rules, but for saving more lives than any protocol approved in Washington. He didn't want glory. He just wanted the men to come home. But without realizing it, he was about to create a method that would transform war hospitals into workshops of human ingenuity. And, as would happen so many times in history, it all started with someone who refused to accept that nothing can be done. The heat in Sicily is relentless. The hills look like they're made of molten bronze, and the field hospital feels more like a furnace under the sun. Inside the tents, the air vibrates thick and humid, heavy with steam and the smell of antiseptic. Captain Samuel Avery wipes his face with a cloth and watches the team in action. Everyone knows what to do, but they all move with the exhaustion of those who have already given their all and still need to give more. The miracle of the improvised autoclave had changed the fate of that camp. Injuries that once meant a death sentence now healed. The team believed. The soldiers believed. But the command did not. To the officers in Palermo, reports of field invention sounded more like rebellion than progress. Doctors, they said, should heal, not innovate. The next morning a jeep appears, kicking up dust on the road. Major Clarence Doyle, representative of the Army Medical Corps, gets out. A tall, stiff man in an impeccable uniform with a permanent expression of disapproval. He observes the camp as if examining a suspicious experiment. Captain Avery? Yes, sir. I've come to investigate your experimental equipment. Doyle says the word experimental as if it were an accusation. Avery leads him to the main tent, where the metal cylinder is still emitting faint puffs of steam. Doyle walks around the object, hands behind his back. You understand that any modification to military equipment is a direct violation of regulations? Avery responds calmly. I understand, sir. But I also understand that dying from infection is a direct violation of logic. The major stares at him. You are brave, or reckless. I haven't decided which yet. Over the next few days, Doyle silently observes the hospital's operations. He takes notes in a black notebook, asks questions about each procedure, and gradually, something changes in his expression. He sees soldiers smiling, regaining their color, walking again. Mortality rates have fallen by more than 60%. On the last night of the inspection, Doyle calls Avery out of the tent. Captain, what you've done is ingenious. So you'll approve its use? I can't. Doyle closes his notebook. The Army doesn't operate on improvisation. If I approve your method, tomorrow I'll have 20 doctors building ovens and calling it science. Avery crosses his arms. So you prefer 20 death reports? The major sighs. I prefer order, but you have something most people here don't. Results. I'll forward your records to Naples. Maybe someone higher up than me will see the value in this. Doyle leaves the next day, and the routine returns to its frenetic pace. But something begins to spread through the neighboring detachments. News about the doctor who boils metal and saves soldiers. Within a few days, other units send requests for instructions. Avery spends his nights drawing simple manuals with hand-drawn diagrams and clear, concise instructions. 12 cans, 1 tube, 1 engine cover. The heat does the rest. He doesn't realize it, but his method is already spreading across the front. British, Canadian, and Polish doctors begin to copy the model. Each adapts it in their own way. What was an improvisation becomes a silent network of field engineers, men who understand that war is more than fighting. It is inventing, but war also takes its toll. With the advance into the interior of Italy, the hospital needs to move constantly. Each transfer is a delicate operation. Trucks transport patients, tents, and the famous steam cylinder. During one of these moves, a distant explosion causes the soldiers to throw themselves to the ground. The vehicle carrying part of the equipment overturns in a ditch. Avery runs, the earth vibrating under his feet. Among fallen supply boxes, he finds the damaged autoclave. A crack runs through the metal body. He kneels, runs his fingers over the tear, and takes a deep breath. It's not the end, he tells himself. During the night, he repairs the equipment using whatever he can find. Pieces of tin, wire, and even a fragment of a truck radiator. When he turns on his makeshift device, steam escapes with a soft whistle. It works. It's not pretty, Heller comments, but it seems alive. Avery smiles. What saves lives isn't always pretty, Lieutenant. The days pass. The battles in the north intensify, and the wounded arrive in numbers that the camp can no longer absorb. Avery and his team operate non-stop, often without rest for 30 hours straight. The surgeon feels his body weakening, but his mind remains alert. With each new case, he notes solutions. He improvises new instruments from pieces of metal, creates IV stands from barrel pipes, turns flashlights into surgical reflectors. The field hospital becomes a workshop of inventions. One morning, a young messenger arrives carrying an official envelope. The wax seal bears the coat of arms of the Allied Medical Command. Inside is a short memo. Captain Samuel Avery, field sterilization procedure received and reviewed. We recommend an in-person demonstration to the technical committee in Naples. Date, September 14th. Avery reads the note silently. Heller watches him, hopeful. They'll recognize you. Or they'll arrest me, he replies with a half smile. Depends on how they look at steam. In Naples, the military hospital is housed in an old stone monastery. Cold rooms, smelling of disinfectant and restrained fear. When Avery arrives, he is greeted by a long table with 6 officers and 2 civilian scientists. One of them, Dr. Peter Wilmot, a renowned microbiology researcher, adjusts his glasses and speaks first. Captain Avery, we have read your reports. Impressive, but unconventional. Would you like to show us your device? Avery places the reconstructed cylinder on a metal table. He turns on the small alcohol burner and explains the process with the precision of a teacher. The steam cycle, the accumulated pressure, the ideal time. He shows his notes, the field results, the temperature curves. One of the officers interrupts. Do you really believe soldiers can build this with scrap metal? Avery replies, soldiers already build bridges with scrap metal, sir. Why not the chance to survive? Dr. Wilmot approaches and observes the sealed lid. Fascinating. This is applied science in its purest form. Necessity. Another general shakes his head. But it's dangerous. There's no control, no standard. If one of these things explodes, Avery interrupts him. Sir, the only thing that explodes in the field is the infection we don't treat. The silence that follows is tense. Finally, Wilmot speaks. I suggest we call this the Avery Field Sterilization System. It may not be pretty, but it works. The name sticks. In the days that follow, Avery is instructed to teach his technique to a group of medical corps engineers. The Army begins manufacturing safer versions with regulating valves and official manuals. Before long, hundreds of units are distributed throughout Italy and North Africa. Back at camp, Heller greets him with a smile. So the coffee oven has become official equipment? Avery laughs for the first time in weeks. I don't know if it's official, but at least it's not illegal. With the new approval, Avery gains something he didn't expect: freedom to experiment. He begins to observe not only the injuries but the environment, the heat, the dust, the humidity. He discovers that the location of the tents influences the patient's recovery. He decides to reorganize the entire hospital. He changes the directions of the openings, creates ventilation channels, and positions reflective tarps to reduce the internal heat. Within a week, the environment no longer feels like an oven. The soldiers sleep better, and the smell of infection diminishes. In the report he sends to the command, he writes, "The human body is a battlefield. The difference is that the enemy does not wear a uniform, but invisibility." The phrase circulates among officers and doctors. Some see it as poetry, others as insubordination, but no one can deny the results. Mortality rates in units that apply Avery's methods drop by 70%. As the war front advances north, Samuel Avery's name begins to echo behind the scenes of the Allied command. The field surgeon who built an autoclave out of truck parts is now called upon to discuss medical logistics with generals. He doesn't feel like a hero, just a man who refuses to accept that war must be synonymous with unnecessary death. And even when officers congratulate him, Avery keeps his feet planted in the mud of Sicily. He knows that every innovation in war is born of desperation, and that, in the end, the only true victory is every life that breathes again. But what he doesn't yet realize is that his next improvisation, born not of iron and steam, but of pure human intuition, will do much more than save lives. It will make the army itself question the line between obedience and compassion. October 1943. The rains have come to Italy, a reminder that war does not choose its climate. Mud swallows the roads, trucks get stuck, and Captain Samuel Avery's field hospital seems on the verge of collapse. Tents sink under the weight of water, instruments rust, and humidity turns every breath into steam. But what really worries Avery isn't the weather, it's the silence. The ambulances haven't arrived in 2 days. The radio, full of static, transmits only garbled messages from headquarters. Something is wrong on the Salerno front. Very wrong. As he tries to clean the sterilization equipment, Avery hears hurried footsteps outside. Lieutenant David Heller enters, covered in mud up to his knees. "Captain, the convoy has been hit. We don't know how many survived. How many are coming here?" 42 confirmed wounded. Maybe more. Avery takes a deep breath. 42 men, and they barely have room for 20. The main generator failed that morning, and the serum supply is half gone. He looks around and sees the exhausted but willing staff. "Prepare everything you can," he orders. "Today we're going to need miracles." Minutes later, the trucks begin to arrive. Mud covers the uniforms, the stretchers, and even the red flags painted on the sides. The sound of engines mixes with the voices of panic. Each vehicle brings pale bodies, muffled cries, and lost looks. It is a human flood. Avery and Heller divide themselves between the makeshift tables. The surgeon works like a frantic pianist, moving from one patient to another, his hands steady despite the chaos. The makeshift autoclave remains active, spitting steam like a living animal. The heat inside the tent is unbearable, but no one complains. For hours, time ceases to exist. The operations continue in sequence, each more risky than the last. And it is in the midst of this frenzy that Avery notices something different. One of the wounded, a young British corporal, his face covered in mud, has a wound in his chest that pulses irregularly. His heart is failing. Avery asks for a stethoscope, but the noise of the rain and the screams makes it impossible to hear anything. He places his hand on the young man's chest and feels his breathing falter. "He's still here," he murmurs, "but not for long." There is no cardiac equipment, no defibrillator. The army never sent them to a frontline hospital. And it is at this moment, between despair and instinct, that a new idea emerges. Avery runs to the autoclave, turns off the burner, and watches the steam escape. Then, he dismantles one of the valves and holds the rubber tube that conducts the hot air. "Heller, bring the oxygen tank." The lieutenant stares at him, confused. "What are you going to use oxygen for? His lung is punctured." "Exactly," Avery replies. "We're going to make the lung work outside." He quickly connects the tube to the tank and creates a makeshift connection. He asks 2 nurses to hold the patient while he positions the valve near the young man's mouth. Then he begins to squeeze the tank manually, sending short bursts of air. The corporal's chest rises, then slowly falls. For long seconds, nothing happens. Then the young man's body reacts. A weak cough, a hoarse but real sound. Avery continues, measuring the rhythm with his eyes. Heller watches, incredulous. Are you ventilating him by hand? Not me, says Avery without stopping. We are. For 30 minutes they take turns pumping air manually until the young man's heartbeat stabilizes. The silence that follows is almost sacred. The rain continues outside, but inside the tent there is only the soft sound of restored breathing. Avery places his hand on the patient's shoulder and whispers, "You're going to live, soldier," even if no one understands how. In the days that follow, the method spreads. The team begins to use the system in other cases of respiratory collapse. Avery calls it manual-assisted ventilation. Simple, effective, improvised. The results are surprising. Men who would previously have been declared dead begin to recover. But the news, as always, reaches the command. A week later, a helicopter lands near the camp. 2 officers and a doctor in a white coat, Dr. Franklin Graves, sent directly from Naples, descend from it. With him, a clipboard and a suspicious look. "Captain Avery," he says without greetings, "I have been informed that you are performing experimental resuscitations in the field. If you define saving lives as an experiment, then yes." Graves observes the improvised equipment, the tube, the oxygen tank, the rubber connections. "This is dangerous. One mistake and the lung could collapse." Avery responds calmly. "And what's the alternative? Let them die?" The silence is heavy. Graves writes something down on his clipboard. "Command will need to review this." "Command can review it all at once," Avery retorts. "The soldier breathing in there doesn't need authorization." The doctor stares at him for a long moment. Then he sighs. "You're the kind of man that war creates and peace doesn't know what to do with." Over the next few days, Graves stays at the camp, observing every procedure. He tries to find flaws, but he can't. The method works. Manual ventilation becomes routine. Even the skeptics on the team begin to see the impossible happening before their eyes. On the 3rd night, Dr. Graves approaches Avery, who is writing by lamplight. "Captain, there's one word you haven't used yet." "Which one?" "Hope." Avery smiles slightly. "I prefer to call it mathematics. A life saved is an equation solved." Graves shakes his head. "And yet you make it seem like a miracle." When Graves returns to Naples, he brings with him detailed reports and a request to officially test the Avery method. The command approves the evaluation. In December, the technique is replicated in British and French field hospitals. In January, it reaches Allied medical manuals. The name doesn't matter. Some call it field mechanical respiration, others manual ventilation. For Avery, it's just logic applied to urgency. Back on the front lines, the hospital is on the move again. The war rages on and winter approaches. The cold is another enemy, invisible and cruel. The tubes freeze. The steam turns to ice. Avery adapts everything once again. He creates insulation systems with thick fabrics, heats the valves with embers, and covers the connections with oil-soaked cloths. Everything works until the heat of improvisation overcomes the cold of defeat. On a particularly cold night, as the wind howls in the mountains, Heller comments, "You know, Captain, sometimes I think you're not a doctor." Avery looks up from his notebook. "What would I be then? An engineer who refuses to let death win?" Avery smiles, but there is sadness in his eyes. "It's not death that scares me, Heller. It's the routine of it. Outside, the distant sounds of war continue. But inside that canvas tent, amid tubes, fire, and steam, a man and his team are reinventing the meaning of survival. The surgeon who started out boiling instruments is now teaching the entire army to breathe again. And yet he feels there is something more, something he has yet to discover. War, after all, doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when someone finds a new way to keep life going. January 1944. The cold covers the medical camp like a veil of glass. The tents crackle under the weight of frost and the air feels like metal. Soldiers breathe white clouds as the wind cuts like blades. Even so, inside the main tent, the heat still pulses. Steam from the makeshift autoclave, kerosene fire, and the constant sound of the heart of a hospital that refuses to stop. Captain Samuel Avery wakes up before dawn, as usual. He reads reports by the flickering light of the lamp and drinks cold coffee, the same as yesterday. The medical journal is full of notes, diagrams, new ideas. He has begun to develop a faster triage method, capable of prioritizing patients based on vital signs, not just the apparent severity of their wounds. It's simple, logical, and could save dozens of lives a day. But he knows. Any new innovation brings more suspicion than support. Lieutenant David Heller enters, rubbing his frozen hands. "Captain, the northern convoy brought visitors. Officers. Officers?" From where? Rome, I think. They're asking for the doctor who builds machines from scrap metal. Avery sighs. It always sounds better when they tell the story from afar. Shortly thereafter, 3 men cross the camp, their uniforms too clean for this place. Leading the way is Colonel Albert Marin of the Medical Inspection Service. He has a thin face, a steely gaze, and a leather briefcase under his arm. Captain Avery, we finally meet. Colonel, I've been reading a lot about you. Makeshift autoclaves, manual ventilation, alternative triage. It seems you have more ideas than instructions. The colonel's voice is neutral, but the tone carries a threat. Avery maintains his composure. I have too many soldiers and too little time, sir. Ideas are all I have left. The colonel takes a step forward. The problem, Captain, is that you're starting to inspire others. And when people stop following orders and start following individuals, the army stops functioning. Heller, standing nearby, watches silently. The air inside the tent grows heavy. Marin opens his briefcase and pulls out some reports. We've received communications from units in Monte Cassino, Anzio, and Naples, all applying your techniques, some successfully, others with serious flaws. 2 patients died from incorrect ventilation. A third suffered burns from steam. Avery closes his eyes for a moment. If you're looking for a war without mistakes, you've come to the wrong planet. Don't play games with me, Captain. What you're doing is dangerous. It's the kind of boldness that the enemy calls weakness. Avery stares him straight in the eye. Or maybe it's the kind of courage that the enemy fears. For a moment, there is silence. Then the colonel closes the folder. I will report to command. Until further notice, you are prohibited from using any equipment that has not been officially approved. Heller tries to protest, but Avery raises his hand. Understood, sir. The officers walk away, leaving only the sound of the wind blowing against the canvas. Heller speaks softly. They're going to dismantle us, aren't they? Avery replies calmly. They can dismantle the tent, Heller, but they can't dismantle an idea. In the days that follow, the camp seems quieter. The makeshift machines are covered with tarps. The team works with minimal resources and tension mounts. The absence of the autoclave brings back the invisible fear of infection. The hospital begins to feel the weight of the orders. On the 3rd night, a group of soldiers arrives carrying a wounded sergeant. Artillery explosion. His legs are shattered, his face covered in soot. Avery examines him quickly. Multiple fragments, risk of severe infection, and time is against them. We need steam, says Heller. It's forbidden. He won't make it through the night. Avery looks at the unconscious man on the table. He remembers the colonel's orders, the regulations, the threats. But he also remembers the others, those who survived because of what he dared to do. The decision is not rational. It is human. Turn on the burner, he finally says. Heller doesn't hesitate. The sound of the fire igniting is like a drum beat. Steam begins to rise and the tent comes back to life. Avery operates for 3 hours straight. When he finishes, the sergeant is still breathing. Improvisation has won out once again, but the victory is short-lived. 2 days later, Marin returns, this time with an escort. He enters the tent without warning, and the smell of steam still lingers in the air. What is this, Captain? Avery wipes his hands slowly. What you are seeing is a living man. The colonel looks at the unconscious patient, then at the equipment. You disobeyed a direct order, and I saved a life. Marin takes a deep breath. You are suspended from duty. Turn in your ID and remain in camp until further notice. The silence that follows is heavy. Avery's team watches in shock. Heller takes a step forward, but the captain stops him with a gesture. It's okay. Do what you need to do. Hours later, Avery sits alone in his tent. The wind rattles the canvas like a melancholy metronome. He opens his notebook and writes, Science is what we do when the rules aren't enough. But when the rules win, progress dies. The next day, soldiers remove the sterilization equipment and load it onto a truck. The entire camp seems colder, without the steam, without the fire, without the heart. But war waits for no bureaucracy. A week later, a bombing strikes a nearby medical unit. The survivors are brought to Avery's camp. Heller runs to the tent where the captain remains silent. Captain, we have 20 seriously wounded. Then call the new doctor. He hasn't arrived yet. Avery stands still for a moment. Then he gets up, puts on his coat, and walks to the main tent. Heller, bring the instruments. But you're suspended. Then say the wind sent me. He approaches the stretchers and begins to work. The steam is gone, but his determination remains. Every cut, every stitch, every decision is a form of resistance. The hospital begins to pulse again, and when at dawn the first officers arrive, they find Avery covered in sweat, his face tired, and 20 men alive around him. Colonel Marin enters furiously. "Have you gone mad?" Avery stares at him. "No, I just went back to being a doctor." The officer looks around, confused between anger and respect. Finally, he speaks in a low voice. "You should be in jail." "Maybe, but they would be dead." Marin doesn't respond. He just leaves silently. The next day, a telegram arrives. It is short and to the point. "Captain Avery, your suspension is revoked. The command recognizes the effectiveness of the methods employed. The Army needs results, not excuses." Heller reads it aloud and smiles. "They finally understand." Avery shakes his head. "They don't get it, Heller. They just ran out of options." In the following months, the hospital receives new equipment based on his designs. Field autoclaves, ventilation kits, rapid triage manuals. Everything standardized, tested, and authorized. And although no one says it openly, everyone knows. Those machines were born from the improvisation of a doctor who refused to accept orders as a sentence. But recognition comes with a burden. Avery's name begins to circulate among the high command. Invitations to lectures, strategic meetings, laboratories. He is the symbol of a medicine that thinks, and that, for many, is dangerous. In March, a letter arrives from London. It is from Dr. Peter Wilmot, the same doctor who supported him in Naples. "Captain Avery, your courage has inspired not only doctors, but all of us who believe that the battlefield is also a laboratory. However, be careful. The system loves heroes, until it needs scapegoats." Avery reads silently. He folds the letter and puts it in his pocket. He knows what it means. Every new idea, every improvised victory, brings him closer to something bigger, and also more risky. That night, as the wind blows through the hills, he steps out of his tent and gazes at the starry sky. For a moment, the world seems quiet. He thinks of the men he saved, those he lost, and the price of each choice. Heller approaches. "Thinking of giving up, Captain?" Avery smiles slightly. "Give up? No. Just trying to remember what it's like to rest." The lieutenant laughs. "The war will end one day." "Wars always end, Heller. The difference is what remains when the silence returns." He looks at the horizon, where the clouds reflect a distant glow, perhaps fire, perhaps dawn, and he knows deep down that his real fight is yet to come. Because sometimes a man's greatest battle is not against the enemy ahead, but against the system that says change is too dangerous. February 1944. The coast of Anzio dawns with a cold that pinches the face and a salty wind that respects neither tents nor convictions. Captain Samuel Avery's field hospital has been moved to a small hill east of the port. From there you can see the waterline cut by boats coming and going like desperate clocks. The distant sound of naval batteries mixes with the hiss of radios, and in the background, the continuous murmur of an army trying not to waste its own time. Avery walks between the rows of covered stretchers, greeting the team with a glance, who already know his gestures before he speaks. The field autoclave purrs with its gentle steam. The manual ventilation kits rest clean, assembled on neatly folded cloths. But the surgeon sees another battle, a quieter one, in every corner, the waste of minutes. In recent months, he has obsessively noted three things: how many steps he took between one tent and another, how much time a nurse wasted looking for a bottle, how long it took between a patient's arrival and the first useful intervention. What he discovered alarmed him more than any clinical report. Lives were being lost in the intervals. Not because of incompetence, but because of friction, distance, confusion, noise, wrong lighting, crossed paths. That morning, he gathers the team under the main tent. Lieutenant David Heller holds an improvised blackboard, made from the lid of a box painted black. "Folks," Avery began, pointing to a stub of chalk, "our enemy today doesn't wear a uniform. It's called dead time. For every 10 patients, 3 arrive here and wait, before receiving the first care that really changes the outcome. Not because of a lack of courage, because of a lack of a map." He drew a circle. "Let's reorganize the hospital like a clock. I call this the timeline protocol. Every minute has an owner, every step has a reason, every arm has a color." The team approaches, curious. Avery continues, the chalk scratching firmly. Minute 01. Identification and silence. Whoever receives the stretcher says only what is necessary. No jargon, no shouting. The patient hears more than it seems. The brain cooperates better when it is not frightened. Minute 1 to 2. 2 things in parallel. Pulse and breathing. We don't have machines. We have hands and eyes. Nurse A counts the respiratory rate. Nurse B feels the radial pulse and takes notes. Without speaking loudly, the numbers go on a simple 3-line form. Minute 2-4, golden action. If breathing is not cooperating, manual ventilation starts here. If the pulse fails, fluid goes up. No discussion. No searching for a tourniquet at the bottom of the box. Heller, your IV stands are hung in the same place in all tents, at the same height, same distance from the entrance. Minute 4-6, routes defined. Green goes to short observation, amber to stabilization, blue to the procedure room, gray to protected rest. No calling it unfeasible. Not in this hospital. What we can't do now, we prepare for the next chance. He holds up a small belt with colored fabric ribbons. Colored wristbands. They are not sentences. They are visual promises. Those who look at them know where to take the patient, what to prioritize, without shouting, without pushing and shoving. And Avery points to the lamps. Light. Let's stop fighting it. Direct light only on the procedure table. In other areas, we keep the light diffused and low. This calms patients and staff, reduces errors due to glare, and, he smiles slightly, saves kerosene. What about sound? Heller asks. Sound, Lieutenant, is the last secret. Avery pulls strips of thick canvas with eyelets out of his pocket. Acoustic curtains will hang them in the hallways, creating pockets of silence. You'll see the mind breathe when the noise stops. There is a murmur among the nurses. None of this is magic, just organized, and that's exactly why it seems powerful. 3 days. That's how long it takes to amputate habits and sow new roots. The tents are repositioned like numbers on a dial. Triage at the 12 o'clock position, stabilization at 3, procedures at 6, observation at 9, pharmacy and sterilization in the center, like the axis of the hands. At the top of each entrance, a crude little sign with a clock design indicates the stage. The colored wristbands are cut from parachute tape. The IV stands are marked with chalk on the canvas so they can always be returned to the same place. On the first morning with a clock, the hospital feels different. The silence is not total. It never will be. But the absence of shouting creates a new music. Coordinated footsteps, low voices, discreet metal. The soft light makes the eyes stop searching for shadows. The first post-reorganization train arrives early. 14 patients. They come in like waves, and this time they don't hit invisible rocks. In 6 minutes, 4 are already breathing better with manual ventilation, 3 are already receiving fluids, 2 are going for observation, and 3 are going for procedures. Heller's eyes shine as he marks the time on a pocket watch. 12-4, Captain. We've reduced it to a third. It's not a miracle. It's behavioral engineering. In the afternoon, 2 visitors arrive. Dr. Franklin Graves, now officially attached to Allied Medical Command, and the unlikely Colonel Albert Marin. The colonel observes the tent display with skepticism that has a hint of hidden admiration. What is this, Captain? Graves asks, curious. A hospital with hands, Doctor. Avery smiles. We traded genius for predictability. They walk together around the circuit. Marin touches one of the canvas curtains that reduce the noise in the corridors. It seems trivial, he comments, but it's quiet here. Quiet saves lives. Avery points to the colored wristbands. One glance, one decision. The rest flows. Graves takes quick notes. This needs to be documented. If we can replicate it, we reduce errors across the board. If we call it protocol, the Army listens, Marin says, half to himself. If we call it improvisation, they resist. Avery holds the colonel's gaze for a second longer than protocol dictates. There is a kind of silent reconciliation there, as if admitting that usefulness sometimes trumps pride. At night, the wind changes. A message arrives by radio. Emergency disembarkation of a hospital ship in the port, with surplus cases that the Italians cannot absorb. 50 patients on the way. The team looks at each other. 50 is a number that pushes the clock off the table. Today we'll find out if the dial spins in a storm, says Avery, adjusting his sleeves. The lights dim in the hallway. The curtains are closed. The announcer, a young nurse chosen to speak only the 3 vital signs of each new case, takes his position next to the triage. Heller checks the stock of wristbands. The autoclave breathes ready. The trucks arrive in succession. It's a river of stretchers. The announcer sings softly. Amber, weak pulse, irregular breathing. Blue, conscious, chest pain, stable. Green, fever, orientation preserved. And the line does not stop. Like water finding the right bed, The bodies move forward without pushing, without hesitation. The first hour passes with a synchrony that would make a tired ballet envious. Less beautiful, more necessary. Avery circulates like an attentive conductor, but does not centralize. Every micro-decision has been trained, pointed out, designed. He only intervenes when the clock threatens to fall behind. At one point, 2 blue stretchers approach the procedure room at the same time. The corridor narrows. A simple "leave it to me" would be enough to bring everything to a standstill. Instead, the nurse looks at the 6 o'clock sign, breathes, pulls one of the curtains, and creates a shortcut that was already marked with chalk on the floor. The ghost route. A simple, planned turn clears the way and saves 30 seconds, which on that night are worth months. It's not a technique, Heller whispers, without taking his eyes off his pocket watch. It's a way of thinking. And thinking is what we needed most, Avery replies. At the end of the night, the numbers tell the story. 0 losses due to delays, 7 ventilated with stability, 12 stabilized with fluid in the first window, 23 under observation with improvement, 8 referred to the hospital ship for continuity. The rest, sleep. Sleeping there is a victory. Graves closes his notebook with his notes. I didn't see individual heroism, he says thoughtfully. I saw ordinary people doing the right thing every time. It's less epic. It's harder. Marin stares at the map of tents. I'll be frank, Captain. I came prepared to complain. I'm leaving with work. This is going in the manual. Avery doesn't celebrate. He just puts water on to boil and serves mugs to the team. The steam draws light arabesques in the still air. Captain, calls a shy voice. It's a 20-year-old boy, a newly arrived doctor with an Ohio accent. Can I ask a question? Go ahead. All this, where did it come from? I mean, who taught you? Avery thinks for a second. His face softens. There was time to learn from those who didn't return. He puts down the mug. And from those who waited. For us. The young man nods, not quite sure how to respond. Heller, standing nearby, jots down the phrase in the corner of the form. The clock has a face. 2 days later, a jeep stops at the camp entrance. A military photographer gets out with a camera hanging around his neck, accompanied by a public relations officer. They want to photograph the hospital that became a clock. Avery hesitates. He doesn't like the spotlight, but he realizes there is a greater risk than a poorly framed photo. The risk that this depends on him to exist. Take the picture, he says finally, but take a picture of the map. He points to the chalkboard, the arrows on the floor, the curtains, the bracelets. If I'm not here tomorrow, anyone here can replicate it. The idea cannot have an owner. The photographer captures everything. The humble details, the silent choreography, the way hands always find the same hook, the same knot, the same shelf. When he leaves, he carries not a heroic portrait, but a visual manual. In the afternoon, a light rain falls. The smell of wet earth invades the sterilization tent. Avery allows himself a few minutes to sit on the edge of an empty stretcher. He takes a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket. A letter from Dr. Peter Wilmot, which arrived that same day. I heard about your clock. The future of field medicine may be less technology and more process design. You are designing behavior. Just be careful. Unnamed systems become rumors. Give it a simple name and let it circulate. Avery smiles. He picks up the chalk. On the makeshift blackboard, he writes in large letters, Timeline Protocol, Version 1, Dashboard Map, Colored Wristbands, Silence Curtains, Golden Action, Minutes 2 to 4, Ghost Routes, Diffused Light Below. He adds a line, What the patient doesn't feel helps. Heller enters, reads it, and nods his head in satisfaction. Version 1.0, Captain? Don't trust anything you can't improve, Avery replies. Tomorrow it will be 1.1. He does not yet know that this photographed sheet of paper will cross the English Channel, be dressed in English typography, earn a French stamp, a Polish translation, and appear months later in ship cabins, sanitary wagons, basement infirmaries, and in the pockets of people he will never meet. That night the sea wind warms up a little. Someone improvises a valve radio and for a moment, the hospital hears music. The sound mixes with the steam and the deep breathing of those who finally sleep. Avery walks to the entrance of the tent and observes the darkness as if consulting the future. Heller leans against his side. Do you think this will remain? I mean, afterwards. Avery takes a while to respond. What remains is what does not depend on names. He points to the map on the board. If tomorrow someone erases my trail and only the drawing remains, it will have been worth it. The clock keeps ticking. The clock keeps ticking. He takes a deep breath, closes his eyes for a moment and feels, for the first time in a long time, that the war has given him back minutes. It's not peace. It's enough order for life to find its way. And it is precisely in this gap between chaos and method that the next challenge enters, silent as a clock hand. A telegram that arrives at dawn, with 4 words that will demand everything from protocol, and a little more from the heart of a doctor who has learned to change time. Night evacuation under blackout. The clock will run in the dark, and someone will have to teach it to light up from within. Night fell like a thick curtain over Anzio. No stars, no lighthouses. The blackout had been ordered hours earlier, and the whole world seemed to have disappeared into black and gray. The waves crashed against the dull harbor, and the sound of sirens came from afar, sharp, persistent, a reminder that the sky was still enemy territory. At the field hospital, the timeline protocol was about to be tested to its limit. The telegram was clear. Immediate evacuation. Transport convoy arrives in 47 minutes. Total blackout. No light authorized. 58 patients. 20 could not be moved without manual ventilation. 10 were unconscious. Not enough vehicles. And above all, no light. Captain Samuel Avery read the note under a flashlight covered with dark fabric. The light escaped like a secret. Beside him, Lieutenant David Heller waited for the order. "Captain, it's impossible to do this without lighting." "Nothing is impossible, Heller. We just haven't figured out how to do it yet." Avery looks around. The hospital looks like a sleeping body. The tents are silhouettes. The air smells of kerosene and steam. He knows that the clock he has created must now learn to tick in the dark. "Gather, everyone," he says. Every nurse, every driver, every pair of hands. Minutes later, the team stands before him, their faces barely visible in the dim light. Avery speaks softly but firmly. "The blackout is total. No flames, no reflections. The enemy has bombers less than 20 kilometers away. If they see light here, there will be nothing left of us." "What about the patients, sir?" asks a nurse. "We'll get them all out, one at a time, without running, without talking loudly. Today, sound will be our light." He raises what looks like a small metal box. This is a field metronome. He taps his finger on the lid, and a soft, rhythmic sound echoes in the tent. Tick, tick, tick. Each beat marks the time between the steps of the protocol. 3 ticks for each evacuation zone. Like a heart that cannot stop, the team watches him intently. Avery continues. Every tent follows the sound. No clocks, no lamps, just rhythm. The sound of the metronome will be our count. The plan is simple and insane at the same time. Use sound as a compass. The first stretcher convoy forms. The colored bracelets are now covered with cloth strips that reflect only under ultra-low light, invisible to the sky, but noticeable up close, under the dim glow of flashlights covered with damp gauze. Heller leads the way. Each group has an exact interval of 20 beats to leave the tent, turn right, and reach the evacuation point. The route is marked on the ground with stretched string, the shadow wire. When the metronome starts ticking, the entire camp moves as if breathing. Tick, 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 each step synchronized with the sound. The stretchers follow the wire, silent. Only the murmur of boots in the mud and the distant sound of the sea. The first group reaches the evacuation point. Trucks with dark tarps wait with their engines running. No headlights, just the muffled roar of the engines. Avery moves from tent to tent, checking on each patient. The air is cold, the vapor from their breath forming clouds that seem to disappear into the darkness. One of the soldiers wakes up during the movement. "Doctor, is it dawn?" Avery holds his hand. "Not yet, but we're going where the day doesn't take so long." The second wave of evacuation begins. The light rain makes the ground slippery. The metronome continues to beat, unperturbed. The sound is the only link between dozens of lives and chaos. Suddenly, a distant explosion cuts through the air. The sound echoes through the hills. Everyone instinctively ducks down. Avery feels his heart race. The radio crackles with interference. Voices in Italian and English mix in panic. "We maintain protocol," he whispers. Metronome doesn't stop. The sound guides their movements once more. Tick, 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 a rhythm of survival. Half an hour later, the hospital is almost empty. Only 8 patients remain, all in serious condition. Among them is a young man with his chest wrapped in bandages and connected to a manual ventilator. Two soldiers pump his chest, alternating the rhythm of their hands to the beat of the metronome. Avery approaches. "How many cycles, Heller?" 46, sir. 2 more groups and we're done." The last one is always the hardest. They prepare the last stretcher. The ground is covered in mud. The wind howls between the tents. One of the metronome's straps comes loose and the sound slows down. For a moment, the rhythm is lost. The men's breathing quickens. Chaos lurks. Avery holds the small device to his chest, closes his eyes, and begins to tap the rhythm with his finger. Tick, tick, tick. The sound returns, simple, human. Everyone lines up again. "Continue," he says, his voice firm. "As long as the sound exists, no one is lost." The last group follows the shadow line. The rain thickens. The wind carries the smell of fuel and sea air. The port is just ahead, but visibility is almost zero. Avery holds the flashlight covered under his coat, guiding only with the tip of his shoe. Suddenly, a muffled cry. One of the stretchers has slipped on the muddy slope. The patient slides half a meter and stops, caught by a rope. The pumping of the manual balloon continues. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound of the metronome seems far away. "Heller!" Avery shouts, low but firm. "Tie the axle!" The lieutenant throws himself on the ground, hooks the stretcher onto a root, and helps lift the wounded man back up. The young man is still breathing. When they return to the trail, Avery realizes that the metronome has stopped. Absolute silence. He picks it up, taps it with his finger. Nothing. The soaked mechanism has jammed. For a moment, time disappears. Then from behind, a voice emerges, a young medic clapping softly to keep the rhythm. Another joins in. Soon there are 5, 6, 10 people clapping in unison. Tap, tap, tap. Avery feels a lump in his throat. It's not the sound of a machine, it's the sound of living people. They continue like this until they reach the port. Each clap echoes against the wet tarps. The convoy reaches the trucks, which depart one by one without headlights, only with the muffled sound of engines and the human beat guiding the night. When the last vehicle leaves, Avery and Heller remain alone in the empty camp. The rain falls harder. The tents slowly collapse as if saying goodbye. Heller takes a deep breath. "We did it, Captain." Avery looks at the ground, covered with footprints that the rain is already beginning to wash away. "No, Heller. They did it. I just set the pace." Hours later at the pier, the convoy is safely aboard the hospital ship. The first light of dawn begins to break through the gray horizon. A nurse approaches Avery with a small package. "I found this at the camp. I thought you might want it. It is the metronome, still wet but intact." Avery holds it carefully and smiles. "It stopped at the right time." Graves appears at his side, coming from the infirmary. "The reports are in, Captain. No losses during the evacuation." "None." He takes a deep breath. "Command wants your complete protocol. Everything, from the metronome to the bracelets." Avery nods. "It's not mine, Doctor. It belongs to whoever is listening." Weeks later in London, the official document is distributed. Night Evacuation Manual, Avery Protocol, and among the technical notes and diagrams, a handwritten sentence kept by the original editor. "When there is no light, use sound. When there is no sound, use the beat of your own heart." Captain Avery was never the same again. He continued to serve until the end of the war, then retired to teach field medicine at a small university in Maine. He never called himself a hero. He never wanted medals. He just said that the rules were born out of improvisations that worked. Years later, when asked about that night during the blackout, he replied in his usual calm tone, "The secret wasn't the metronome. It was the silence between the beats." That's where we learned what war tries to teach us by force, that life, even in darkness, seeks the rhythm to continue.